There we go. Thanks, Liz. Welcome to this system plan discussion. We're talking about the system plan for 2024. In some ways, not much has changed, but in other ways, there is quite a lot that has changed. I'm going to open up the system plan proper. And I've got there we go. What's the one I want? And can you see this now? Okay, thank you. This is the working document for the system plan. It is not final by any means. I think the biggest change about the first page is that it has our new logo on it. Quite a difference from the one that is from the mid-70s. Nothing in our, I'm going to just go slowly through this, but nothing in our vision or mission statement have changed. The only thing that's changed here perhaps is the budget. The Kansas division of the budget usually makes that certification of the actual population in July. So we don't have that yet. So this is the 2021 budget here still. By statute, the counties within our system are named, and those names are included here. Excuse me, there are 53 libraries in the public libraries in the taxing counties. Pawnee is a contracting county. They have one public library. That's the Jordan Library in Larned. A contract determines costs and services. We just updated the contract, and it was signed by the Jordan Library Board and the executive board, and that has gone on for the state librarian to sign. Our mission remains the same. We want to improve library service where it exists and provide service where it does not. That's been the CKLS mission since the 60s when it was established. What that looks like and how that happens has evolved, of course. I was just reading something that was written in 1972, and our main ways of meeting that mission were through the books by mail program and the rotating book service with a modest amount of money going back to libraries. But now we have a focus. We share planning, resources, and system services. We annually review, and by we, I mean the executive board and I do, the costs of all services to member libraries. We look through those and make sure that they're still cost effective, and will anything need to be sunsetted, or is anything no longer sustainable? Right now, we're opening the conversation on the hoopla service. When we had initially initiated the hoopla service, we said that, you know, it would be for 5 years and then we would look at that again. And so it's time for us to look at that and see where we are with that. What we'll do is we'll look at all of the libraries that are utilizing the service, how much it's costing, is it sustainable, just all those kinds of things. This next paragraph here is important. As provided by law, and this is in Kansas statutes, the CKLS full system board contains representatives of all member libraries and appointees by the county commissioners in each of the CKLS taxing counties. This makes a 95-member full system board. The CKLS bylaws state that a quorum of 27 system board members is needed to conduct the business of the system. That quorum was changed a number of years ago, if you all remember that. The full system board meets twice a year, with the spring meeting to approve the system plan and a fall meeting to approve the budget. And the fall meeting approves the budget because the R&R hearing by statute needs to take place between August 20th, I think, and September 20th. And so that necessitated that change in time there. Voting representatives may bring the following business before the full system board. They may bring petitions, resolutions, bylaws changes, of course, recommendations to the annual system plan, and nomination for election of members to the executive board. By statute, the full system board delegates to the executive board all the business of running the library except approving the budget. That must be done by the full system board. And that's why when I first started, I really wanted everyone to be taking a much more active role and a less passive role in the governance of the system. The executive board consists of anywhere between 10 to 14 members, at least 2 of whom shall be county appointees. There must be 1 school librarian and 2 public librarians. The executive board meets monthly to conduct general business. Nothing in goals and objectives has changed, so I'm going to scooch through that. Grants and aid is where you saw the biggest change. And what I'm going to do now is stop sharing this one. And then I am going to start sharing this one. Is that the one I want? No. Just a moment. Let me get there. There it is. Now let me see if it's going to work. Oh, sorry, this always happens. Well, I guess it'll be this. We'll go this way with it. Let me make this big. Okay, can you see this? Yay. All right. This is just a little cheesy slideshow, but it'll be easier for you to see. So funding for the CKLS grants program comes from a tax on those properties so rural they do not pay a tax to support a local public library in these counties. Well, that shouldn't be there. The proposal in 2024 is that the public library base allotment, we will tax and spend $446,500 on the public library base allotment. The courier allotment, and this is just to libraries, is $89,418.30, $18.30. The CKLS cost is just a little over $9,000. We're a 5-day-a-week library, and we have the largest overage charge. The continuing education allotment will be just a little over $37,000. The out-of-district borrowers allotment would be $119,917.64. The resource sharing allotment would be $119,917.24. The school library service allotment is $14,000, and here's the total down here, but it does not include the 4 competitive conference grants. This is the total $826,853.18. The base public library allotment is for those eligible libraries, and to remain eligible, you need to be eligible for state aid, which means that your taxing entity is meeting the maintenance of local effort. And then the library's base public library allotment will be calculated on the state's official population of the library taxing district. This number is going to come from a different place than that population I said earlier in this webinar. This population is provided by the State Library of Kansas, Topeka, each year in your Kansas Public Library Survey annual report. I have had librarians say that's not our real population, and that you would talk with Alice Smith at the library, at the state library, about that, but that is the number that we will use. And the reason for this is when we did the strategic planning several years ago, one of the things that we wanted to do was to allow the consultants to do more consulting and less paperwork. And this gives us just one place to look that we're already looking. We're not looking for another different number someplace else. Libraries are placed by population into library grant categories. And here are those categories there, starting with the smallest, which is Gateway, then all the way up to a major service center 2. And that is the only one we have in that category by population is Salina. These are the new amounts. The proposed amounts here in bold would be 6,000, 8,000, 85,000, 8,500, sorry, 11,000, 21,000, and 46,000. I did have one question, why the Service Center 2 only went up by such a small amount, and I'll come back to that in just a moment. I thought this would be interesting to you. I did ask the other system directors to send me what their basic grant category is. They're equivalent to our base allotment. And you can see here that those numbers vary. I did not get anything back from CKLS, but 6,000 is the new amount. The Northwest Kansas Library System is 3,000. And then it goes up to here. The Northwest Kansas Library System does not have libraries in these categories, but you can even see down here at the Major Service Center 1, the CKLS library will be getting more than the larger libraries in the Northeast Kansas Library System. That is because they are a major contributor to our system. Here, this number is compared to the South Central Kansas Library System and the Southeast Kansas Library System. The Southwest Kansas Library System, I really didn't get anything from Richard there, and they do things so differently that it would have been a little bit difficult to compare, but I didn't get anything from him. Well, now how do I go back with this one? Eek. That I don't know. Can I click over there? This isn't working. Let me get out of here. Come back here. Okay, sorry. I haven't ever done a Google slide before. So you can see here comparing the CKLS with the South Central Kansas Library System and the Southeast Kansas Library System. Okay, one of the new parts of the funding model is that, yes, Joanna, go ahead.
Gail, this page I think has a big error. It says it is recommending that active and expired borrow accounts.
Correct.
If we delete our active accounts, we won't have anybody left.
That's right. Don't look at that. Thank you, Joanna. Okay, your out of district borrowers allotment is one of your new parts of this funding mechanism. When we had the strategic planning a number of years ago, we had a library who was really, they wanted us to be able to base our grants on services provided. And the South Central Kansas Library System does that. And this model is based on that. So what they do is they look at measurable outcomes and services. And measurable is the trick because not all services are easy to measure. This one is. And so this is calculated on the basis of the number of registered borrowers who reside outside your library taxing district. So what this means is, and this is an example I gave earlier when I was talking with a librarian, if you're Smith Center Library and you have a patron who lives in Lebanon, but has a Lebanon card, they can use that card at Smith Center. And that just counts as a regular circulation for you then. But if you have a patron who lives in Lebanon, but they prefer to have their home library as Smith Center, that then is an out of district borrower because that borrower does not live within your library's taxing district, usually your city boundaries, and they don't pay a tax to support your local library. These are calculated on a percentage of the whole system using the formula of the library's actual number of out-of-district registered borrowers divided by the system total of out-of-district registered borrowers times 100% of the ODB allotment. So what we have is for all of the Pathfinder Central libraries, it's easy for us to run a report and find out how many out-of-district borrowers you have. Because when you register a patron, you have to indicate if they live in town or out of town. For those libraries that are not on Pathfinder, every year, I will send them an email and ask them to send me their number of out-of-district borrowers, and then we will enter that into the formula. So right now it's 4 libraries. I sent them in December, I asked them, and they self-reported, and so that's the number that went into the spreadsheet on that. The second part that is new is the resource sharing allotment. And again, this is based on that South Central Kansas Library System model of a service that can be measured. Remember that the system grants in aid is not to duplicate things that your local community is paying for in their taxes for library service. The system is really intended to reimburse, or not, well, there's no way we could totally reimburse, but to kind of subsidize those services by your out-of-district patrons, by those rural citizens. So the resource sharing allotment is measured on the number of resources that you send out, not the number of interlibrary loans you request in for your patrons, but the number that you send out to other patrons. And I've had a couple of questions about this. One of these is, does that patron have to live within the CKLS territory? What if that patron lives outside of the territory? What if they live outside the state? And the truth is that there's not really a good way for us to measure that, because remember, these are measurable outcomes. We can measure all of the number of items that are sent out on interlibrary loan through Share It. And we can also measure the number of items sent out on Pathfinder Consortium. These are measurable outcomes, and we can use that number. The formula for this is very similar to the out-of-district borrowers. It's the number of your library's actual lends to patrons outside its own taxing district, divided by the system total number of lends to other library patrons times 100, and that equals your library's percentage of the resource sharing allotment. Your courier allotment will increase by 8% in 2024, and it really should just say courier increase. Yes, Chris?
Okay, back to the other slide, like when you were saying measurable things, is there any way, because we still have some people that have multiple cards, and we still have people that maybe they did live in the town that's the home library, but now they don't. Now they live in the country and they go to multiple libraries. Some libraries aren't asking if they had another card, they're just getting more cards.
Then that's something that we will all need to work on. Often that starts when a new librarian is on board and we need to train them. The Trailblazers, we'll be visiting with Michael about that on April 6th and looking at how we can clean that up. Is that what you needed to hear?
I think so. That wasn't just a question from me, it was from a couple other places, so hopefully.
Okay. Okay. The courier cost will be going up by 8% in 2024. That means that your CKLS allotment is going to stay 89% of the total invoice plus any volume charges, but your own library's percentage will be 11%. The reason for the courier increase up to 8%, the Courier Policy Committee voted on that. Last year, CKLS and a couple of other systems pumped a lot of extra money into the courier service because fuel costs had risen so much that the fuel volume surcharge had been implemented beyond what libraries had paid for courier service last year. Not every system is able to do that, and we're certainly not able to do it again. Increasing by 8% will allow there to be a modest reserve to be used if those fuel surcharges go up and up. If they don't go up over a number of years, that money will be credited back to libraries, or a portion of that money. I don't really know exactly what that'll look like until it happens, but that money is not really to be considered long-term savings, but it is to be there for a little reserve just in case. The way that the courier bill works is not going to change. The way that CKLS pays you is not going to change. There's just that dollar amount. So know that when you're starting to work on your library budget, to increase your courier amount by 8% so that you'll have enough put aside for that bill. Okay.
So Gail,
Yes.
the courier allotment that CKLS is paying is remaining at the 89%.
Correct.
It's not, the dollar amounts are changing, but we're still keeping our commitment to 89%.
That's correct. And libraries will still pay 11%. That's correct. What questions do you have? The standards are remaining the same. There's no extra work that you need to do, nothing different that you need to do. Can't make it work. There it goes. Your eligibility for grants is still the same. The school libraries will still be getting $500 if they're eligible. For them to remain eligible, much like you do, they have to submit their expenditure report at the end of the year. I have about 6 libraries that didn't do that this year, and they're not going to get that grant next year.
This is Brandon Hines, Hayes Public Library.
Hi, Brandon. Go ahead.
Gail, will you please speak to the impacts that this funding model will have on Hayes Public Library and Salina Public Library?
Let me, oh, yeah, I can do that. Just a moment. There we go. I'm opening documents. Okay. In the 2023 system plan, the major service centers 2, with a population of 25,000 to 100,000, received $23,100 as a base grant. In 2024, libraries will be put into a grant category based on their true population. There are a number of libraries that will drop in category because of population, and Hayes is one of those. By population, Hayes will drop down to a major service center 1. Salina will remain as a major service center 2. Salina's base grant will go from $23,100 to $46,000. Hayes will go from $23,100 to $21,000. That's the base grant. Let me open up the spreadsheets. It'll take me just a minute to get there. Okay.
If you have the spreadsheet and just can share the cumulative effect, that would be.
I will. I'm just trying to remember where I have it so I can look for it quickly. And of course, you know, I can't find anything. That's not it. I'm looking to see, it might be right on my desktop. Nope. Okay, let me just go in my drive and find it.
Thank you for your patience. I am subbing for Mary Beth and I don't have access to all of her documents. Otherwise, I would have that at the ready and I apologize.
I have to remember what everything's called. Well, for heaven's sakes. I'm drawing an absolute flippin' blank. Sorry.
Gail, I'm looking to see if I can find.
Nope.
Gail, is it the one that you sent in
It
the
is.
email? Okay, so that one's called 2023 March Restructuring CKLS Funding Mechanism with 2022 stats. Is that the one you're looking for?
Yes.
Okay,
Thank you.
you're welcome.
Yeah, this is it. Okay, let me share this. Thank you. Who was that?
Danae,
Thank you.
you're welcome.
Here we go. Okay, I think this is the right one. This is the one that I would have shared. You should all be able to see this now. There are several tabs along the bottom. The base grant here shows different options that the Finance Committee looked at and ultimately discarded some of them. One of the reasons that it looks like this option is the one that they kept. One of the things that they had to look at was how much money they increased the lower categories by, because a part of this restructuring is that whole maintenance of local effort. The libraries need to be able to show that their community is providing funding and in kind equal to or exceeding the amount of money they get from CKLS.
So to be clear on that, if the library community funds their library at $10,000 and then they receive $10,000 from the system, that meets that threshold for.
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
but there's nothing in place if a library says, say we're to fund it $2 million and then another library has maybe $500,000. It's not proportion. It's just you meet the local maintenance effort isn't impacted by how much you give as long as you meet that threshold.
Right, just like at the state level. Then that's what that's based on. So this page here shows the out-of-district borrowers and the number of resources shared out. And you can see here, every library is a percentage. We have the number of their out-of-district borrowers, their percentage of the whole, the number of items sent, the percentage of the whole. And what we're finding is that libraries that are open less hours, of course, are going to send out less things. It's just kind of how that plays out. Then this one here shows what was in the previous year. Let me see if I can want to make this a little bit smaller, bigger. Well, it's a huge spreadsheet. And I think this is kind of self-explanatory. It talks about what the library received in the previous year. And then the previous year, all CKLS monies received. And that's because there's the system grant, and then there's the courier allotment, and then there's the CE allotment. Those two items are accounted for separately. And so that's going to show up differently here. The new system-based allotment is here. And that's not showing. Why is that? Cancel. Well, I don't know why this isn't showing for me. It's not my lucky day. So let me come down here. So here is the Salina Public Library. They would have received previously through their base grant, through their system grant, $66,731. The money that they received the previous year from CKLS also includes an MOU, which is a memorandum of understanding. And last year, the executive board determined that this is 2023 is the last year that the MOUs will be in existence.
When was that determined?
I think it was June-ish. It was at
That
a
was
board
in
meeting, and it would be in the minutes.
I believe it was the July meeting in Republic that it was finalized. It was discussed in the June meeting in AGRA.
Yeah.
Okay, this is really what I want you to lean in on. So it looks like, well, give me the numbers, please. My initial
Okay.
question was, what's the impact? So what is Hayes Public Library in Salina receiving now? What will they be receiving after this change? And then please explain these MOUs, because there's a lot more to the MOUs than just, because that's what it's listed on all this materials, MOU. Well, nobody knows what that means. I do,
Right.
but the system
Right.
doesn't.
Well, most of them do, because we've been very transparent about that, and it's been very, very clear. You'll remember that before I got here, it was all secretive, and that's no good.
I don't think it was secretive. I've got minutes. I think you use that word secretive like it was this underhanded thing, but it really wasn't, because I mean, I went back to our minutes in 1987 when this thing was established for support for
I am not.
cataloging and processing. And that's what the MOUs turned into. You created the MOU.
What year
with
did you go back to, Brandon?
87 actually was approved in 80. It looks like it was worked up by the state librarian, Dwayne Johnson, Jim Swan, the CKLS director, and then
And that was
Hayes Public Library.
the data link grant, correct?
Well, it was for processing and cataloging. And
What was it called?
it was processing, and it was for cataloging, processing. And it was whenever they actually automated for the first time.
Because
And
I know that for a long time, Hayes joined with Fort Hayes State, and they were the only automated one
Yep.
for interlibrary loan for a long time. And that's what the
Right.
data link grant initially
right.
was.
So it was for it
I-
was the catalog. That's what
Yeah.
that was. It was a catalog. And then the MOUs wrap that up. And the foundation of the MOU was
Do this.
this foundation of that MOU, $40,000 of it, so we can break down the other things, was cataloging and processing. So effectively, this service has been offered to Hayes since I've got the January of 1988 is when actually was reported out. So I'm assuming, and I could see where there was a conversation in the 80s. And yeah, you're right. It was called the data link because that's what they called the the automation program, the ILS.
Right, it was
that's
an
what they called it at the time.
automation grant.
So yeah, so please share the numbers and then speak to the
And
MOUs and the
My
decision making.
spreadsheet is showing, it's not showing properly, Brandon. I'm sorry. You did all receive that. I don't know why it's not showing, and I don't have time to dive into it and fix it, and I am sorry for that. So essentially what's going to happen, what is proposed is that I'm going to stop sharing since it's not sharing well. What is proposed then is that the MOUs are going away. The money that was spent on the MOUs will be combined with the public library service allotment. And that money then is going to be used for those measurable items for the out-of-district borrowers and for the resource sharing, those measurable items. One of the reasons I'm not sure, and that's what I know is going to happen.
Well, share the numbers, please. You still haven't shared the numbers. That was my initial question.
I did share them already out
No.
through email.
No, I asked you to talk about, speak to it now.
Well, it's
Because
not
it's
showing
important.
up
I
for
mean,
me.
it's very important. I mean, it's pretty critical when you see
Yes.
the size of those numbers.
And I don't know why it's not showing up properly for me. I know why. Let me do this. I was trying to look at it in Google.
How are our concerns being relayed? I mean, this is the first chance we've really got together on this.
Yes, this is how all of the libraries always in the past have been able to give their input. Okay, good. I can see them now. I was looking at it in Google and it needs to be in Excel. Sorry about that. Okay, here we go. Now we can see those numbers. Okay, we have Hayes Public Library here. I'm going to go ahead and highlight that just all the way across. And then we have the previous year in the system, not the system grant, but yes, it is the system grant. Hayes got $44,122. The total amount that Hayes received was $100,522.86. The previous year, all monies possible were $101,072 for Hayes. Under the new system grant, the new base allotment is $21,000. The out-of-district borrowers is $27,884, and the resource sharing allotment is $5,944. Under the new model, the possible amount is $58,925. There's a reason for that difference, of course. One of the biggest differences is that Hayes, population-wise,
That's not the biggest reason. The biggest reason is you're taking away $40,000 for processing.
Please don't interrupt. Hayes by population falls as a Mazer Service Center 1, and so that sees a decrease in the base system grant. Now, the total monies possible, which would include still the courier grant and CE, would be $64,225. Okay, go ahead.
The main reason we're losing that much money is it's not only like a couple $1,000s, the base grant, you keep coming back to that, but the real difference is you are no longer going to be paying the processing, which is part of the MOU, the processing and cataloging. That's the reason. So as you've got up here right now, we're going to receive $101,000 this year, and we're going to receive $64,000 next year.
Yes.
And so this plan's probably going to lead us to have to make changes to Hoopla and restrict our usage. So you might as well take off another $5,300 there. So our system funding is going to go from over $100,000 to probably $59,000. And Salina's is pretty drastic as well.
Yes. And I'll point out Salina now that I can see what I'm doing here. Here's Salina. Salina is staying in the grant category they are. they had $120,066. And then this next year, they will get $84,612. They did opt out of Hoopla, and so they don't have that amount. The amount then would be, let me just double check. The new model total would be $84,612. So that is also a reduction.
So the two
There are-
library, oh, I'm sorry, I thought you were finished.
I was, go ahead.
Okay, so just to be clear with, I mean, you know this, you see this, that the two libraries who are responsible for, I've got the 2021 numbers, 64% of the circulation in this entire system are set to lose about $70,000 to $75,000 in funding. That's a major concern of ours. Circulation is the number one indicator the libraries use. They report it out to their boards every month. It's the number one stat. It's probably the number one stat with the state library. That is the number one indicator of actual library services. And I mean, there are others. I don't want to be exclusive to it, but
Right,
this
right.
plan fails to even represent that. Actual library services are not represented in this plan. And the
Well,
purpose of the regional
sorry.
library systems were created to improve services where they exist and extend those services where they do not. Yet you entered into this whole process as saying,
Brandon,
system, let me finish.
oh, sorry.
Thank you. You claim that system funding should be based on extending services beyond the local taxing district. That is not the charge of regional library systems. You're taking half of that and you're really doing it at the detriment of the Hayes Public Library. And the State Library Board says system funding should be based on services offered. This model fails to do that. The base grant doesn't even do that, and it makes up 70% of this funding model. It's based on population. The base grant should not be based on population alone. And you're sitting here taking these these groupings of library service levels. We'll take Hayes versus Great Bend Public Library. We have 20,000 people. They have 15,000 people that they serve, yet you're grouping us together. If you value numbers, actual numbers, why are we convoluting this by taking those numbers and lumping groups together? You should just use the population if that's what you're going to do, which population is one thing we're taking out. And the base grant is 70% of the formula. We have a lot of issues with the out of district borrowers and the ILL, but those are only 20% of, or 15 to 20% of the formula. Go ahead, Gail.
Okay. We
Oh,
looked.
it looks like we have a hand up, Gail.
Oh,
Looks
yes,
like we have a
please.
hand up.
Go ahead.
Gail, this is Chris. There is a lot of libraries, Brandon, Melanie, that are smaller than you guys, and a lot of them choose to do as much processing and cataloging on their own as they can. And a lot of them are just 1 to 2 people libraries. So, you know, yes, you guys had an MOU, but these other libraries have been doing it and they're not receiving extra for the services that they're doing. That's not through CKLS either.
But they are, CKLS is paying for their system. They're paying for Pathfinder, which and maintaining Pathfinder. That's a big part of this for the catalog and cataloging.
But everybody has the chance to be on it, on the same software.
Everyone does. Is Hayes Public Library is that on the table?
Yes,
How much is that going to cost?
for you.
I don't know. Who's paying for that? Are you paying for that or are we paying for that?
I don't know. I don't have those numbers available.
But you can do it next year. If we're changing the funding formula, that would have been really good to know. Nobody's talked to us about it.
Nobody's talked to Selene about it.
I know that the reason for the change in the MOU for processing and cataloging is because Hayes and Salina are not the only libraries that process and catalog their own materials, but those are the only two libraries who receive any funding for that.
Well, on the MOU, it says logistically, CKLS cannot provide that. So that if that changed, you should have talked to us about that, because that's what this year's MOU, the one that you drafted only 3 years ago, says. It says you cannot logistically provide that to Hayes and Salina. Yet this is a big part of the funding reduction and a big chunk of money that is leaving Hayes and Salina.
I wasn't meaning they could do your processing, Brandon. I was saying that you could be on Pathfinder like everybody else.
I heard you, but I didn't know that was even possible. I didn't know, nobody's ever approached us about that. I didn't know. And I mean, we would have to definitely see, would it be worth it for our patrons to do something like that?
Yeah, there were conversations about that years ago. Long before us.
Yet they chose to pay for it. Yeah, pay for processing and cataloging. So they were okay
Brandon,
with
they
it.
weren't paying for the catalog for the ILS. They were paying for the cataloging and the processing of materials, is my understanding.
You can't do that without a catalog. And you can get technical and say you shouldn't be paying for the staff member to do it, but this is a conversation that should have happened a long time ago. We should move on from this. Yeah, extend the offer to us.
Long before I was here even, and before you were here, every library had an invitation to be part of Pathfinder Central, and every library had the option to join. In fact, the libraries at a system meeting, it's my understanding, voted to choose the COHA model before I even got here.
According to the chat, as Joanna says, those invitations to be part of Pathfinder were many, many years ago. Every library had the option to join into the consortium catalog.
Well, if we would have known that our funding was going to be pulled for not being a part of it, that probably changes the whole decision-making process. So whenever that happened, I don't know who made that. Well, you're making that call right now. That's what's happening. You're making that call now.
I'm not, and you keep saying you a lot, and I am not. It is not me. I am not the boss of this system. I report to the executive board.
So this funding model, is that what we're calling it, it's approved as of February.
The executive board has approved it. That's correct.
Okay, so who provided input for the system libraries? Who represented us, and then who else was consulted on this? What library professionals were brought in on this whole process?
The finance committee was made up of county appointees, those direct representatives of our rural taxpayers, and Sherry Holmes, as the previous board chair, was on the committee.
Were there any
They looked
conversations
at-
had?
I'm sorry?
Did any of those board members have conversations with any libraries?
No, they did not. They looked at all of the funding structures and the system plans of all of the other existing regional library systems in Kansas. A number of those, no, who was it? Who was on that? I think 2 of the members on that committee were part of the finance restructuring committee. And they looked at the South Central model as the most stable and the one that actually paid libraries based on measurable services. And that's the model that they enacted. They determined, because last year it was determined there would be no more MOUs, they determined that instead of not taxing for that money, they would take that money and combine it with the public library service allotment, and it would be divided equally into 2. And it would become the out-of-district borrowers allotment and the resource sharing allotment.
You say you're following the South Central Kansas library system model. When you showed those graphs earlier of the different libraries, the charts of the different library systems,
Mm-hmm.
that isn't a fair comparison at all because they're completely different systems. They have different operations. I mean, South Central Kansas serves 500,000 more people
Yes,
than the Central Kansas library system.
yes, they do.
The South Central Kansas library system does not have a shared catalog. That's a big expense that does not, and a service that does not benefit us. That's a huge difference. Furthermore, the South Central Kansas library system, there's a group down there that shares through their own
Yes,
interlibrary loans called CanShare. And they attempted to get all those shares, which is facilitated through the courier. They attempted to get all those on there as part of this similar allotment, and they were denied.
who denied them? Was it their executive board, their full system board, or just the director?
I don't know, but I mean, and I don't know what even the reasons were, but they have a shared system that was not allowed. And it's very much like the pill system. They are
Yes, I
shared.
also know that the Northeast Kansas library system is looking at something similar as well, based on this same funding model.
Well, let's wait until they approve it. We're talking about South Central, who you are basing your model off of.
Yes,
But they're not allowed to use those shares. And furthermore, if South Central Kansas decided to create a shared system and they added the shares through that system and then did not allow Wichita, Hutchinson, Derby, Mulvane to get the same credits because they weren't a part of that system, it would never happen. You're using those pill shares on a system that Hayes and Salina aren't even a part of. It makes it look like other libraries share more of their resources to out-of-district borrowers than Hayes and Salina, which is completely not true. Again, you aren't using circulation, which is a foundational thing that we measure. Yeah.
I'm using the numbers that you provided me for out-of-district borrowers when I asked in December. And I'm using the numbers that were available to us on Share. Melanie, did you have your hand up?
Yes, why isn't OCLC also counted? Like South Central counts both Share-it and OCLC because that's interlibrary loan. Why was OCLC left out?
We counted the numbers that were reported to the state library. It's my understanding. So those would, if you reported OCLC, those would have been included. Do you think that they weren't? I'll write that down.
Well, I had asked the state what was actually supposed to be in there, and she was supposed to clarify that for everyone. So I think we need to look at that because I don't think that has all of our numbers by far. I'll look up her email.
We'll also inquire about that. We may have better luck with getting an answer faster. Melissa says, and Melissa was part of that finance committee. She says, while everyone in CKLS may borrow from SPL and HPL, do they? Libraries are subsidized to help rural patrons to have library services. These libraries would have books cataloged and processed regardless, wouldn't they?
If everyone uses Share-it, it's an equal platform for interlibrary loans.
Yes. One of the things to point out also is that for many years, there were 5 libraries who were not on Pathfinder Central, but only Hayes and Salina received funding from CKLS for that. The other 3 libraries never received any money for that ILS.
But that's not our fault. That's something that CKLS decided to do or not.
That's because the funding was not for the ILS, it was for the actual processing and cataloging. When we set that number, when we bumped it up to 40,000, we figured that was a staff member.
And we spend way more than $40,000 on processing.
What CKLS has found is that we now have all of our items except for donated items processed through Ingram. And we processed over 200,000 items last year, and it costed about $20,000. And those items come, they're beautiful and processed and ready to go, ready for spine labels and ready for cataloging.
That doesn't count the staff member though.
There isn't the staff member for cataloging, right?
Right. I have 2 points that I need to make
Yes.
before we move on. So you have your out of district borrowers allotment, is one of the foundational principles of this group was you claim there that this is where funding should be directed, yet it only makes up 15% of the overall grant funding. So, and by 15%, I mean the 4 big pots. I didn't add on which is significant, the courier cost, but you say that the committee or the charge of the committee is the funding should be directed to out of district borrowers. Circulation isn't even factored in there. So if we have X number of out of district borrowers, it's like you're counting every out of district borrower as one circulation. And if it's such an important thing, why it's only 15%. This is actually the area of South Central Kansas system that we could totally get behind if it was applied correctly. If you actually used an amount of money that in the funds that were fair, we could get behind this. But then also you need to factor in circulation, because circulation, these out of district borrowers are doing more than borrowing one item. They're borrowing who knows how many, it depends on the person, but it's given the exact same thing as ILL. ILL and resource sharing for us makes up 1.5% of our circulation. And that's not reflective of the out of district borrowers. That doesn't represent the out of district borrowers.
I've written that down.
Thank you.
Okay, so you need for us to factor in circulation, and resource sharing or ILL makes up 1.5% of your circulation. And it doesn't represent those out of district borrowers who may have more than one borrow.
Well, out of district borrowers make up more than 15% of our overall circulation. So, but it's only funded at 15%, and it's the primary, it's the small pot. The base grant is the big pot. Does that make sense?
Yes, one of the things that the finance committee determined early, and we knew there would have to be hard decisions. There was no question of that going into this. And one of the things they determined is that local library support is what supports the local library and those local borrowers. That the system dollars were to help subsidize those out of district borrowers, those rural taxpayers who pay the taxes.
Can I respond to that?
Absolutely.
But that's not what's happening here. That's base grant isn't going just to out of district borrowers. That's not what's happening. And that's also not what's happening for the actual services that are offered to CKLS libraries. It's not just going to out of district borrowers, and the way you're applying it doesn't make sense.
Speaking to what Brandon's talking about, on the first page, those bulleted lists talk about that local library taxes given to support local library services, but that's really up to the local library board, what services they provide and to where.
Yes. Within
so
reason and in agreement with statutes, absolutely.
And then the CKLS funding. So this comes across that all of these taxpayers in our counties are giving CKLS these funds, and that those funds are being used for them by the way this is written. So then the question, which is what Brandon was going towards, is what services is CKLS just providing for those county taxpayers, or what percentage of your budget is only for those county taxpayers? If part of this figure is being done on that. And again, I'll reiterate also what he said, that you're counting it as one circ. Could whole lot more.
Melanie, would you repeat that? The only part I got out of it is what percentage of the budget is only for those county taxpayers?
The CKLS's other part, not our funding, but the rest of it. What services are you providing only to county taxpayers, and what percentage of your budget is only going to those county taxpayers who are funding it?
Okay. Okay.
And that another point on that goes along with, we're talking about comparing to the South Central Kansas library system. From my numbers, it looks like 45% of the taxes levied for South Central Kansas Library System goes back to those libraries in direct grants. And from
Yes,
what I can from what I can tell, CKLS returns 30%.
I can address some of that. CKLS heavily invests in resource sharing. We have a much higher courier subsidy than South Central does, it's my understanding. And CKLS also heavily invests in digital content.
And go ahead.
And there are a number of services that we have that they don't provide. Every system is different than that. We're not looking exactly to make ourselves into the South Central Kansas Library System. We were just looking at their two measurable outcomes for this finance restructuring.
And then you mentioned digital. This plan fails to compensate libraries for digital resources. And there's another $5,300 that goes towards Hoopla, which was considered a non-touchable. At the end of March, I just ran a report. We are going to have spent $7,000 on out-of-district borrowers for Hoopla just by the end of March. We have no choice if the system chooses not to support us on this, but to make some tough decisions on who we're going to extend that services to. Salina made that decision last year. If we have to make that choice, this is actual services that we have to consider withholding. We have not made a motion on that, so don't say that we've done that, but that's a major issue. South Central Kansas Library System, one director said he thought it was this funding model was approved in 2008. That was before libraries had the ability to, do you know what year it was, Gail?
2004.
2004. So that was before we had the ability to even loan ebooks or e-audio books. Now I know Gail mentioned earlier that Hoopla is a real issue because of the expense of it. Local libraries that remain relevant are going to have to get in the arena to continue to change, to provide valuable resources and services to their communities. We are at 40% digital circulation, and it's our percentage of out-of-district borrowers who use that service versus the ones who come into our library to check out physical books is a huge, I mean, it's more, it's significantly more. And we know about 25% of our out-of-district our Hoopla cost is for out-of-district borrowers. We have no choice but to limit that if this happens. And frankly, we don't know if we should be allowed to do that. We have a lot of questions about that at the state level, if you should even be allowed to do that, because we should be providing reciprocal services to the entire system. But this model fails to completely, please write that down, Gail, completely compensate libraries for digital, which is already 40%. It's only going to grow.
For digital, yes, and for circulation. Okay. Anything else on this? Yes, Melanie?
I have a question. At the top of page 2, Hoopla is one of the several things that were listed as untouchables. Can you explain to me the reasoning behind that?
What they meant by untouchables is they use the term loosely as things that they didn't want to pull money out of. They know that digital is the future, and they wanted to make sure that we set aside funding for digital content in the future as well. And not just Hoopla, Sunflowery Library, because as Brandon said, Hoopla, it may not be sustainable. Even some of the big libraries in Kansas now are eliminating Hoopla because it's so expensive. And they're going to different platforms and different models. So it might not be Hoopla. It might be, who knows what's going to come out next year. But it is that digital content needs to be funded, as does the resource sharing, especially courier. Does that answer your question?
Yes. On the ILLs, why what's the reasoning behind not just having everybody share it so that it's an equal opportunity to loan across the board, and then share it uses its formula, decide to where that share comes from?
What we know is that the system has invested heavily in Pathfinder Central because it's so much better and faster and easier to share it. It's a time saver and a cost saver. It's paperwork with sharing with Pathfinder Central is almost non-existent. And that's why then they decided to include that in as well.
Are those items transferred via the courier?
Yes, they are. Yes, and that's why some of even our smaller libraries now are getting close to having overage charges. The J.H. Robbins in Ellsworth this year has moved up to have an overage charge, but not enough yet that they can be a 5-day-a-week library.
Gail, it looks like you've got some things in the chat you need to catch up with.
Okay. Let's see. Everybody is saying they loan to everybody else. There's that, of course. Karen in Hoisington says, I loan heavily to Hayes and Salina. They borrow far more than we do from them. No library in CKLS lends exclusively to one group or the other. They overlap. Thus, city libraries are subsidized to help offset the additional costs of additional patrons. I see the base grant to augment the expense of the physical plant for use by the rural patron. PIL, which is Pathfinder Interlibrary Loan, is way easier than Share It, as far as I and my staff are concerned. Everybody's lending to everybody else. Let's see. One of the things that I've been asked is to point out there were more than just 2 libraries who moved down a category based on population and will also be losing funding. It's important to note.
May I respond to that, Gail?
Yes.
I think there are 8 libraries set to lose funding, maybe 9. And Hayes and Salina average loss is $35,000 to $37,000. The average loss for those other 6 to 7 libraries is $1,500. Let's not act like this is a apples to apples comparison, please. That's a major difference.
Brandon, I'd like to respond to that just in terms of, yeah, I completely agree that the numbers are not the same, but
the dollar amounts, sorry.
The dollar amounts are not the same in the, but looking at, I see 1, 2, 3, at least 4 one-person libraries that are still in the room here. And I would bet that their loss of $1,500 is going to feel like your $30,000. And I'm not going to call them out to speak out on this, but I would bet that that loss feels the same to them. And
why don't you let them speak for themselves, Patty? If they feel that way and they're here, then sorry if that was rude. I don't. You represent us too. You're a consultant
Yes.
for the Hayes Public Library, and I don't feel like you're standing up for us like you're standing up for everyone else. So please let them speak for themselves.
That sounded like a direct attack, Brandon. And so I would prefer that you address us as CKLS members, as the professionals that we respect you as.
Could I ask some more questions about some different things?
Yes, about the system plan.
Yeah, about the funding and all of that. See here. On the continuing education portion, every library receiving the same dollar amount.
Mm-hmm.
Has it been considered, or what's the reasoning behind everybody having the same dollar amount but yet very widely different staffing?
That's what I inherited, and that's what it was. It was a higher number, but most libraries did not spend it, and so that number was reduced. to $700, and still, of course, now with the way things are, still a lot of libraries aren't spending all of that every year. And that's the reason why.
Is that going to be looked at and reconsidered?
Well, it could be. I'll write it down.
Have you or any of the other consultants brought that up to the finance committee? Or the
No, that
executive
wasn't
board
one of the
after this
things.
was approved?
That wasn't one of the things we looked at. Norma Mullen says, my loss will be substantial for Logan. We went down from a linking to a gateway library. We have any amount of lost money is not good for any library. That is true. We are all fighting for everything. Here at Bison, I am a one-person library and every dollar lost hurts. Yeah, it's the same for everybody there.
I have another question on the interlibrary loans. Best practices is that interlibrary loans not a substitute to develop an adequate collection based on the library service area needs.
Mm-hmm.
Because some of this funding is going to be based on ILL, how is CKLS, how are the consultants for the executive board looking at that?
That comes out of the state library's definition of what a best practice, and from ALA of what a best practice for interlibrary loan would be.
Yes.
What that measures is that a library does interlibrary loan. When interlibrary loan first started, and I am not old enough to remember that, thank goodness, but it's the same as when we were first talking to library boards about Pathfinder Central. Library board said, well, great, then we won't need to spend any money. We can get that from elsewhere. And so that's why at the state level, it was determined, no, interlibrary loan is not a substitute for developing your own collection. That's where that comes from.
Yes, and since that's interlibrary loans a part of this, what is in place at CKLS to make sure?
To make sure what? That libraries do interlibrary loan?
That interlibrary loan is not a substitute for the development of an adequate collection.
We look at the expenditures that every library has on collection at the end of the year. And every library is spending a good portion of their budget on collection every year.
We also continue to heavily add to rotating books, which is a service available to every CKLS member library.
CKLS has a consultant. It's a part-time consultant that does all of the training on Share It. She's also very active on the statewide interlibrary loan community, which includes sort of revamping the whole, I don't want to say governance or structure or anything like that, but the KICNET was dissolved and there's something new in place, and she is on that new structure. I think it's called a committee representing, and she also makes sure that everybody gets trained on how to do interlibrary loan. Does anyone have any more questions or comments? At the executive board meeting yesterday, no, it was Wednesday, not yesterday, they voted to hold the main meeting in person instead of online. That meeting will be in Russell at Fossil Creek, May 24th. That meeting will start at 10 a.m. After we log out here, I will post that information for libraries so they can get that on their calendars and let their voting reps know.
Gail, I'll go through the,
Upcoming.
I'll repeat that. I'll go through the other CE events that are coming.
Thank you.
Yes, I see it. Can you repeat? Yes, that meeting will be held at Fossil Creek in Russell, Kansas on Wednesday, May 24th, beginning at 10 a.m. and it is the May full system board meeting. There will be no CE activity. It is just a meeting. There will not be lunch provided. There are a host of other things happening in CKLS, so now's the time to get your pen out so you don't miss out on anything. Next week, part of the statewide after lunch course series, there will be a presentation on Thursday the 30th at 1:30. After lunch course speaker is Carly Spina. We'll be talking about library design and how to make your library more effective for all users. On Thursday, April the 6th, will be an in-person directors meeting, followed by a Trailblazers meeting at lunchtime and an idea swap, and that will be held at the Glen Elder Public Library in Glen Elder. Registration is open for that. Tech Week is the week of April 17th. There will be 4 days of events on Monday, the 17th, Wednesday, the 19th, and Thursday, the 20th. Those will all be held at 1:30 in the afternoon. And we have one day will be Google Slides, one day will be Cool Labs and the
Google
Aspen.
Docs, excuse me, Google Docs.
Google Docs, sorry, Google Docs. One will be on Sunflower eLibrary and Hoopla. One will be on Cool Apps and Aspen Discovery. And then Tuesday night, the 18th at 6:30, Gail's gonna go over tech-related policies that your library board should have. So that's a good night that your library board could get their yearly training in as well. Let's see, and then we go to April 26th is the first of the Explorers Group series. That one will be held at the La Crosse High School, and that's at 4:30 in the afternoon. Please register because we bring pizza and cookies. And what's unique about those Explorer Group meetings is they do not have, they don't have an agenda. Is the opportunity to ask the questions that matter to you. And we ask the questions that matter to us about what you need from all of us. And those, there will be a series of those meetings. There are 6 this year. The next one of those will be on May 16th at the Logan Library in Logan, Kansas. Thank you, Norma, for hosting. And then again, the reiteration of that full system board meeting, Wednesday, May 24th, Fossil Creek, Russell, 10 a.m.
I want to thank you all for being here. I'm going to type up all my notes. Thanks you for sharing. And I will take all of your comments to the executive board at the April meeting, and we'll go from there. Thank you. Bye.